Today on 5 Minutes, we're talking about the women's rights movement. Now, Bailey, there are many confusions on the topic of women's rights movement. What were some causes of the movement?
That's a very good question. Many women began to resent their social and legal restrictions. These restrictions made them think about their social status. Women also began to see the connections between women and slaves. They realized that they both experienced unfortunate circumstances. For instance, slaves were considered property and women were considered property of their husbands. Women were not considered equal. Women were thought to be incapable of doing the same work as men. Elizabeth Cady Stanton decided to go to an anti-slavery meeting in London, but was not allowed in. This made her realize that women should form a women's rights movement.
Thank you. Now that the movement has started, what were the women's goals?
The women wanted to be considered and treated equal with men. They wanted equal treatment under the law, equal education, employment, the right to hold property, sue, hold guardianship of children, and the right to vote. They believed that married women should have individual property rights. All their goals revolved around the idea of equality.
Considering their goals, what were some key events of the movement?
Well, in the year 1821, Emma Hart Willard founded the Troy Female Seminary in New York. This was the first school for girls that was founded. This was a key event because they were fulfilling their goals of educational rights. Another key event was in the year 1848. This was the first women's rights convention held in Seneca Falls, New York. Many of the participants signed a declaration of sentiments and resolutions. This declared the goals and issues of the women's rights movement. It also highlighted areas where women were treated unjustly. This was very similar to the Declaration of Independence, revolving around the idea that all men and women are created equal. This convention led to many more women's rights meetings. Lastly, in 1878, a women's suffrage amendment was introduced to the United States Congress. Although the amendment wasn't passed until 1919, it was an accomplishment of their goal for women having the right to vote.
I can imagine there were some challenges for the women. Can you tell me some challenges they experienced?
For sure. A main challenge that they experienced was not all women agreed with the concept of women's rights, and not all men supported the idea either. The news of the Declaration of Sentiments and resolutions got out, and the newspapers created many challenges for the women. By publishing their names, many of the women had signed the declaration withdrew their names because they were embarrassed or being harassed. The women needed all the support they could get, so the newspaper criticized their ideas and gave them many challenges to face.
Thank you, Jackson. I have gathered that there were many women involved in the movement, but there were a few women that were very significant. Who are some women that stood out?
There were three women that really stood out to me. The first woman being Elizabeth Cady Stanton. As said earlier, she was the woman that came up with the ideas of the Women's Convention after she was prohibited from the anti-slavery meeting. The Seneca Falls Convention was her idea, and she also was the first to follow the philosophy of feminism. She introduced women to find their own equality before finding in others. She was an abolitionist that refuted universal suffrage. Stanton also advocated the women's marriage and divorce laws. Another significant figure that was very close with Stanton was Susan B. Anthony. Anthony addressed the temperance movement. This was a movement against the consumption of alcohol. Anthony supported it because she felt it was the only way to end the abuses that women were receiving from their alcoholic husbands. And lastly, Lucy Stone was significant. She refused to change her last name because she wanted to recognize as an independent woman. She published a weekly feminist newspaper which fought for women's suffrage in each state, all three of these women being significant in this movement.
Patrick, I know you criticized the women's rights movement. What did you criticize?
I was opposed to slavery, so I was opposed to women playing active roles in movements. I also believed that the movement was very dangerous because there was many other critics. argue that women should not be involved in politics because it takes away their role from taking care of the children at home. This woman did not have enough education to participate in politics.
Thank you. With the events going on today, what would you connect the women's rights movement to?
I would connect it to this year's presidential election. Now, about 150 years later, we have a woman running for president for the first time in history. She is also receiving criticism for what she is doing, just like the woman during the women's rights movement. She was successful in the sense that she won the popular vote for the election, but she did not receive the electoral college votes, just like the women were successful in the movement.
Thank you, Jackson.
Oh,
Thank you for tuning into this week's edition of 5 Minutes. Tune in next week.